what is the difference between multi-threading and multi-processing? So here if I use thread, okay, thread is always going to use shared memory area. Thread is going to enter into the wait state only for other thread to want to complete their task. If I consider runnable interface is going to include only one method, and the method name here is run. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on multi-threading. I am Revati from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So dear student, before going to start my today's session, let me to recall the things what I have covered in my last session of this unit. There I started with what is package. Along with that, I have covered creating a package in Java. Along with that, compile Java package. That means how can I compile Java package, how to run Java package. Along with that, how can I access packages in my program. These are the topic I have covered in my last session of this unit. So dear student, please remember here that this is very important topic from the examination point of view. You can expect any one short question under this topic. Now, in my today's session, I'm going to deal with multi-threading, thread in Java and runnable interface. So dear student, please remember this is very important topic, and one short question comes under this topic, either 2 mark or 7 or 8 mark question. So dear student, please make a note while watching my video, because this is very important topic from the examination point of view. Now see here, what is multi-threading? Before that, let me to explain what is thread. I hope all are familiar with the word thread. So what is this thread? That is nothing but lightweight process. So what is this lightweight process? So process means what? That is nothing but program in execution. If I execute any program, then it is termed as thread. Fine. Then what is multi-thread? That means I want to execute more than 2 programs simultaneously, and that concept itself called multi-threading. So that concept itself called multi-threading. So what is multi-threading? Multi-threading in Java is a process of executing multiple threads simultaneously. So what is multi-thread? It's a process of executing multiple programs simultaneously. So what is program? Program is nothing but process, and process is nothing but threads. Okay, a thread is a lightweight sub-process. So what is thread? It is nothing but a lightweight, sub-process and the smallest unit of processing. If I consider any program, the smallest unit of processing. So what is this processing? That's nothing but the execution. Multi-processing and multi-threading both are used to achieve multitasking. So what is this multitasking? Here multitasking means perform more than 2 activities simultaneously, and it is termed as multitasking. And To achieve multitasking, I required multiprocessing as well as multithreading. Now, a thread is a lightweight sub-process and it is a smallest unit of processing and it is a separate path of execution. So, it is a separate path of execution. Now, multi-threading than multiprocessing. So what is the difference between multi-threading and multiprocessing? So here if I use thread, okay, thread is always going to use shared memory area. Now what is this shared memory area and where it is present? Now dear student, if I consider CPU, CPU is made up of ALU as well as CU along with memory, that is nothing but primary memory as well as secondary memory. And when I consider memory, in that memory we are going to have shared memory area, and in that I can able to share the memory between n number of processes. That means if I execute any program in shared memory, then the memory is shared between more than two processes. Now, they don't allocate separate memory area. That means when I create any thread, they are not going to occupy any separate memory location. So, it won't take any separate memory area. So, it saves memory as well as context switching. So, what is this context switching? That is switching between one process to another process. That is termed as context switching between the threads takes less time than process. So, dear student, when we encounter the topic multi-threading, then there must be a context switching. That means switching between multiple processes. So, Java multi-threading is mostly used in games and animation. Okay, when we use games and animation to design and develop games as well as animation application, we are going to use Java. In that, especially we are going to use multi-threading concept. Now, how is thread in Java, or what is thread in Java? So, what is thread in Java? We know that the smallest unit or lightweight process itself termed as thread. Now, a thread is a lightweight sub-process, or it is a smallest unit of processing. It is a separate path of execution. Now, dear student, if I consider this diagram, this is nothing but the operating system. And in this operating system, I'm going to have process 1, process 2 and process 3. And a process may have n number of threads. For example, if I consider process 1, here I can able to see 3 threads. And if I consider process 2, here I can able to see 2 threads. And if I consider process 3, I can able to see only 1 thread. Okay, now this is going to use shared memory. That means all the threads are going to make use of shared memory, and to perform their task they are going to use context switching. That means switch from one thread to another. That is done by using context switching, and all the threads are independent. That means one thread is not going to depend on other thread, and if the occurrence That means if there is any exception occurs in one thread, then it won't affect other thread. So it uses shared memory area. So dear student, if I consider this process 1 will have T1, T2 and T3, and all these threads are executing. If any one thread get affected by an exception, then it won't affect to other threads because it is going to use shared memory area, and each threads are independent entity. Now, the life cycle of a thread. That means if I consider any thread, that must have their life cycle, and the life cycle is going to start from new. After that, when I call start function, okay, then I'm going to encounter into runnable, and by calling run function, I can able to run the thread. And if I want to halt or wait or sleep, okay, then I'm going to call the sleep function or wait function. And if I want to stop execution, then I'm going to call dead function. So, dear student, when I call thread function, I'm going to create new thread. Okay, after creating new thread, I'm going to call start function to move from new state to runnable state. Okay, this is the way I can able to create thread, and this is the life cycle of a thread. So a thread must go through various stages in its life cycle. Now dear student, I'm going to have new. So the first stage here, I'm going to have new. So what is this new? That is, a new thread begins its life cycle in the new state. Okay, when I call new function, then it indicates that the thread is going to begin its life cycle. It remains in this state until the program gets starts the thread, and it's also known as born thread. New, if I call any thread or if I create any thread by using new method, then it is called born thread. After that, I'm going to have runnable. So after newly born thread, I want to start the thread. Now the thread becomes runnable. A thread in the state is considered to be executing its task. See here, if I consider the diagram here, by calling start method, I can able to move to the runnable method or runnable state. After that, I'm going to have waiting. So what is this waiting? Suppose if any thread want to wait, that other thread want to complete its task. In that time, I want to call waiting. So sometime a thread transition to the waiting state while thread waits for another thread to perform its task. So thread is going to enter into the wait state only for other thread to want to complete their task. Now a thread transition back to the runnable state. That means it's going to move back to runnable state only when other thread signal the wait thread to continue its execution. That means when the completion of present thread is completed and the signal is transferred, then it is going to move back to runnable state. Now, timed waiting. A runnable thread can enter the timed waiting state for a specified interval of time. That means at present, suppose if I want to halt the execution of a thread, okay, then after that I want to continue the execution of that thread. That can be done by using timed wait. That means for specific time, I'm going to make the thread to sleep. Once the time interval is over, then that thread is going to continue its task. Now, a thread in this state transitions back to the runnable state when the time interval expires or when the event it is waiting for occurs. So it is going to back to the runnable state when the time interval is expired or any event that occurs. And last one is terminated, that is nothing but dead. So a runnable thread enters the terminated state when it completes its task or otherwise terminate. These are the 5 life cycle of a thread, and this one is very important question from the examination point of view. That is, what is thread, and explain life cycle of a thread. So this is very important question from the examination point of view. And followed by, I'm going to have how to create a thread in Java. Till now we were talking about what is thread, what is multi-thread, and the life cycle of a thread. But now I want to learn how can I create a thread in Java. Now this can be done by using 2 ways. One is by extending thread class. Anyway, I have built-in thread class. By extending that thread class, I can able to create thread, or by using runnable interface. So dear student, this is also important topic from the examination point of view. Either you can expect the question like how we can able to implement threads in Java by using extending thread class or implementing runnable interface. So this is for 7 marks or 8 mark question, and both the topics are very important from the examination point of view. Now, Java thread by extending thread class. That means now I'm going to create Java thread by extending built-in thread class. So here thread class provides constructor. So here thread class is going to provide constructor. So what is this constructor? That is nothing but the method name same as class name. And here Java thread class provides constructor as well as methods to create and perform operation on a thread. By using built-in thread class, I can able to create my own thread. Now, thread class extends object class and implements runnable interface. Now, this thread class is going to extend object class as well as implements runnable interface. Now, let me to consider simple example here. As we know that thread class is nothing but the built-in class, and I'm going to make use those thread class in my program. For that reason, I'm going to extend the thread class in my class. Okay, now this thread is nothing but my parent class, and this multi is nothing but my child class, that is CS. Now Inside this, I'm going to call run function. So inside that, I'm going to call this run function and I'm going to write my main program and I'm going to create object for this class. With the help of this class, I'm going to create the object. Now, I'm going to call the start method. That means I'm going to invoke thread. I'm going to create thread and I'm going to make the thread to start. When I call this method start, okay, it's going to invoke run method. By using run method, I can able to move runnable state. Okay, this is the way I can able to extend thread class in my program. To extend thread class in my program, I want to use the keyword extends. Now, I'm going to have the runnable interface. So, dear student, from the examination point of view, this is very important concept. So, you're going to get the question like, write a Java thread which is extended by using thread class. Okay, so this is the important question from the examination point of view. Now, next type here is by using runnable interface. So, what is this runnable interface? What's the need of runnable interface in my program? See here, the runnable interface should be implemented. Dear student, please make a note here. When I'm going to use thread class, then it is extends. I want to use the keyword extends. And when I'm going to use runnable interface in thread, here it is interface. When it is interface, then it is implements. Okay, so runnable interface should be implemented. So it is implemented by any class whose instances are intended to be executed by a thread. Now, runnable interface have only one method named run. If I consider runnable interface, it is going to include only one method and the method name here is run, and it is used to perform action for a thread. Now, let's consider this syntax for this run method, that is void. So it is return type and I'm going to make it public and my method name here is run. And followed by, I'm going to have starting a thread. That means how can I start a thread? So here the start method of the thread class used to start new thread. That means if I want to start the execution of any thread, in that situation I'm going to call start method. So a new thread starts. Okay, so the new thread is going to start. The thread moves from new state to runnable. Okay, suppose if I want to move from new state to runnable, then that can be done by using run function. So, when the thread gets a chance to execute, it target run method will run. Okay, suppose if I want to create new thread, then it is start. After that, I'm going to invoke run method to complete its execution. Now, let me take simple example here. Okay, so here my class name is Multi3 and here I'm going to use runnable interface. So, what is my interface name? It is runnable. So, it is interface. For that reason, I want to implement that interface in my class. So, I'm going to implement. For that reason, I'm going to use the keyword implements. Now, inside this class, I'm going to call the run method. Okay, inside this class, I'm going to call the run method. Now, I'm going to write the main program and I'm going to create the object to my class. So what is my class name? It is Multi3 and I'm going to create the object for that. Okay, now I'm going to create thread. Okay, now I'm going to create thread. How can I create thread? For that, I'm going to make use of thread. So here it is nothing but the constructor. Okay, thread. So class name same as method name. Okay, so it is constructor. I'm going to make use of thread constructor. Now I'm going to create the object for this thread and I'm going to make this thread as runnable. So I'm going to pass the or I'm going to create the parameter R for this runnable interface and I'm going to call the thread. So T1, what is this T1? That is nothing but the object dot start. That means I'm going to trigger the thread. Okay, this is the way I can able to create runnable interface in my thread. Now, dear student, this topic is also very important from the examination point of view and you can able to expect this topic for 7 or 8 marks. So, dear student, next I'm going to have the most commonly used thread classes. That means some of the methods which is present in the Java thread class and what are the most commonly used methods which is present in Java thread classes are run. So this run method. So it is used to perform action for thread. When the thread is ready to execute and what are the executions are carried out that must be written in the run method. Then I'm going to have start method and please see the return type here. All the threads methods are public and it is void. Now start the execution of the thread. Okay, suppose if I want to start the execution of the thread, then I'm going to call start method. So dear student, the next method here is join. So what is this join? What's the need of join here? That is, it waits for a thread to join. Okay, suppose if any thread want to wait for other thread to die, in that situation we are going to call join method. Then get priority, it returns the priority of the thread. And set priority, that means when we are going to have more than 2 or 3 process and they want to execute simultaneously, in that situation we can able to set the priority. Based on the priority, the threads are able to execute. And I'm going to have get id. And what's the need of get id? If I call this method, the thread is going to return the id of the thread. When I call this method, it's going to return the id of the thread. And dear student, please see the return type here. Get id returns integer value, whereas set priority returns integer value, whereas get priority returns integer value. These are the things I covered in my today's session. So dear student, in my today's session, I started with what is thread, how to create thread, and the life cycle of a thread, and what is the thread class, what is runnable interface, etc. So dear student, these are the topic are very important from the examination point of view. And in my next session, I'm going to deal with exception handling, then exception keywords, the try and catch block. Along with that, I'm going to deal with try and final, the most commonly used exception scenarios. Along with that, I'm going to deal with Java multiple catch block as well as final block. Those are the topic I'm going to deal in my next session. So dear student, don't forget to watch this session because all these topics are very important from the examination point of view. So dear student, in my today's session you got more information about multi-threading. Let's meet in the next session with more information about an exception handling. Until that, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.